Hello and welcome to the Legal Edition. I'm your host, Attorney Mary Kay Elloian. Today we have a roundtable discussion on vaccine safety, efficacy, and injury. Our show topic is toxic exposure, toxic truth. The real story about vaccines, the children they injured, the lives they ruined. Our guests include Dr. Stephanie Seneff, Ph.D. She's a senior research scientist at MIT. In addition, we have Dr. Richard Moskowitz, medical doctor and homeopathic physician. We also have with us today Attorney Kevin Conway, vaccine injury litigator and founding partner of Conway, Homer, and Chin Kaplan in Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's been a lot in the news these days since the epidemic, or the so-called epidemic in Disneyland. And I wanted to start with Attorney Conway. Can you explain to us about vaccine injury?
Well, that's a pretty broad topic, vaccine injury. But my firm represents people that are injured by vaccines. Back in the 1980s, we sued pharmaceuticals for vaccine injuries, and the lawsuits were so successful that the pharmaceuticals went to Congress and said, we're going to stop making vaccines. This created a national crisis, and Congress passed the Vaccine Act, which prohibited lawsuits against pharmaceuticals unless you first went through this vaccine program. There is a tax on every vaccine that a child receives before they go to kindergarten. There's a tax on the adult flu vaccine. These go into a national fund, a multi-billion-dollar fund, and that's used to compensate people who are injured by vaccines. Since 1988, we've represented thousands of people in the vaccine program, many of whom have been who have been compensated. It's a no-fault program. It's located in Washington, D.C., the Court of Federal Claims. It's a court of exclusive jurisdiction, and people who are injured by vaccines file a claim there. They don't have to prove negligence like lawsuits against the pharmaceuticals, but they do have to prove causation. They have to prove that the vaccine caused the injury. People claiming that vaccines cause injury it's an unpopular thing to say. Certainly the pharmaceuticals deny this, but again, it's a trillion-dollar industry. The medical establishment that administers the vaccines, they believe that vaccines are safe, and vaccines are safe, except for those few people who can get devastating injuries. And the government, the Secretary of HHS administers the program, and they are their job is to keep up immunization rates, and so they also find that that comments about vaccine injuries are very upsetting to them. So there's some very powerful institutions, the pharmaceuticals, the government, and the medical establishment, all of whom find that claims of vaccine injuries are dangerous and fight them with a lot of emotion.
Well, isn't it true, though, that vaccines are meant, the way they're made today is a one-size-fits-all policy? In other words, they give it to children the day they're born, to elderly people with flu vaccines. And as we've seen, there has been a huge increase in the number of children and the number of adults that have been having major, actually even catastrophic injuries. So how do you explain they're safe and effective when you have this population, and it seems to be exploding? I mean, I read that there was about $3 billion that have been paid out in vaccine injury already. How do you equate safety with what's the injury rate that's going up?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that there are different levels of proof. For example, there's a scientific standard of proof, and the scientific standard of proof is a very high one. And there's a legal standard of proof. The legal standard of proof is more likely than not a preponderance of the evidence. And in those two different standards of proofs leaves lots of room for disagreement. And certainly, the people who claim that vaccines are safe and efficient claim that there's no scientific proof. We don't know, there's no scientific proof. There's no 95% certainty that vaccines cause this injury. From a legal standpoint, we have to show more likely than not, and we show that by showing that you healthy, you get a vaccine within a reasonable time thereafter, you have an injury, and that there's no alternate cause of that injury. So that's the legal standard. So there's lots of room for disagreement as to causation. And mechanisms, we don't know mechanisms. We still don't know how cigarettes cause lung cancer. We don't know the mechanism by which it happens. We have huge epidemiological studies that show, there's market increases, but we don't know mechanisms. And as long as you don't know mechanisms, there's always going to be room for argument.
I think for all those people that are unfamiliar with this area, there's what's called vaccine table injuries, and there's off-table injuries. And correct me if I'm wrong, the table injuries are pre-written by the Department of Health and Human Services as to the types of injuries that they expect that would follow, whether it is an MMR, DPT, or whatever. Do you want to say something about their on-table injuries versus what is considered the off-table injuries?
Yes. When the program was first instituted back in the late 1980s, there were just 3 vaccines that people were getting. There was the DPT vaccine, the MMR vaccine, and the polio vaccine. And there was a table, and in the table said that if you had an encephalopathy, like within 3 days after a DPT vaccine, for example, then the encephalopathy was presumed to be caused by the vaccine. So it was presumption, to give the benefit of the doubt to petitioners. And there were other injuries too. That if you got the vaccine within a certain period of time, you had an injury that was presumed to be caused by the vaccine. Interestingly, a couple of years after the table was published, the Secretary of HHS redefined the meaning of encephalopathy. Encephalopathy generally is brain damage, any type of brain damage, but it was redefined so that you had to have certain symptoms within a certain period of time. And since 1995, there have been not only no encephalopathies that are being proven, but the table, the vaccine injury table, has become virtually useless. So almost no cases are presumed to be caused by vaccines now. And so you have to prove it. You have to, the alternative is, you have to show that the vaccine more likely than not caused the injury. Mm-hmm. So there's no presumptions. You have to prove it.
So, in effect, what they did is they make it more difficult for plaintiffs to come forth and prove an on-table injury, and they would have to go to the off-table injury to prove causation.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, one of the things I read, one of your cases, it was called the Dillo Case.
Yes.
And that case, if I recall correctly, there were 17 witnesses that testified against the injured client.
Yes.
And that was not the norm. And there was what was called an OAP proceeding,
yes.
Omnibus. Could you elaborate on that proceeding in that case, please?
Yes. There were 5,000 autistic children who filed claims in the vaccine program, in many of whom believed that the mercury, which was in several vaccines,
thimerosal,
and that the measles component of the vaccine caused their autism or contributed to it. Because of the sheer volume, and there's only 8 special masters, a special proceeding was set up to hear these cases. Michelle Cedillo, our client, volunteered to be the first test case. And we had a theory, and our theory was that the mercury, the thimerosal in the vaccines, weakened the immune system, and that the measles component of the MMR vaccine persisted and caused the autism. It was a 15-month-old girl who was in perfect health, who got the vaccine, who 15 days later, the precise amount of time you'd expect, for the measles virus to cause symptoms, she spiked a fever of 106, and she was never the same. She was diagnosed with an MMR injury. She had a treating physician who testified that her autism was a direct result of the MMR vaccine. Typically in vaccine cases, each side has one expert. In this case, you say 17 experts. It was actually 22. Wow. 22 experts were put up by the government to fight this poor girl's case. That there was perfect timing, perfectly healthy person, a vaccine that can do this, and no other cause. And she was taken through the ringers by 22 government experts who
And
said.
that was unprecedented, wasn't it? Having that many experts testify against an
But
injured party.
But it was important. It was a very important case.
Important to who?
It was important. Certainly, it was important to the government, to win this case, and they used resources never before expended in the case. And of course, they had vastly more resources than Michelle Cedillo had. But it was for them to link autism with vaccines was something they couldn't allow to happen, and they didn't. The legal opinions denying that vaccines can cause autism, the legal opinions at both the special masters level, the claims court level, and the court of appeals level, they were very, very strong, much more aggressive than they needed to be. And indeed, there have been people in the vaccine program who've been compensated because vaccines caused their autism. But the legal opinions were, you would not know that from reading these opinions.
Can I just
Yes,
make
sure.
a little comment
Sure.
about this? Another thing that's very interesting about this, which Kevin alluded to, is that it took 14 days. And historically speaking, most of the injuries that are compensable must occur within a few days or hours of the vaccine in order to be counted, like anaphylaxis, for example. Whereas it takes precisely 14 days for a primary immune response to occur. And so a lot of those things have been ruled out just automatically because they fall outside that limit of a few days or a few hours, which is the way the law was originally written. So it's it's a catch-22. It's stacked against the patient very strongly. That's all. Go ahead.
On the vaccine injury table, though, they have a temporal relationship between the onset and the actual virulence of the vaccine, or the antigen, I should say. And some of those are within a 15-day time period. From what I understand and what Dr. Moskowitz is saying, there's usually a window when you get inoculated, and then when you start having the symptomology. Did anyone want to comment on that?
Well, just the kinds of things that were historically indicated would be something like anaphylaxis, which is a huge emergency, acute event that happens very soon after the inoculation, within hours or days. That's the model for a compensable injury. Whereas this is an ongoing illness, and it has a chronic character to it. So it falls outside of that model.
Well, according to actually the vaccine injury table, which one can find at 42 U.S. Code Section 300 AA-14, basically says on measles, mumps, rubella, or any vaccine containing any of the foregoing components, there is, under encephalopathy and encephalitis, there is a 15-day window for mumps, rubella, measles, or any vaccine containing any of the foregoing components, and 3 days for DT, TD, or tetanus toxoid.
Right. Yeah, the SSPE, the encephalitis of measles, is a very, very rare event, so they can allow an exception in that case.
So my question is, if there is a problem with causation and relating it back to the injury, how did they come up with the vaccine injury table, to which an onlooker would say, geez, they've already admitted that these things can cause these injuries because they put it on the vaccine table?
Yeah, I would say that they don't concede that vaccines can cause it by putting it on the table. They don't concede that. They don't concede it. They don't believe that the vaccines caused the injuries on the table. They don't believe that. It has not been proven. This is a political solution.
Because they had to.
It was a political
Congress
solution.
insisted.
They don't believe that the injuries on the table are caused by vaccines any more than they believe that the ones off the table are caused by vaccines, including autism, especially autism.
So I know when Congress created the Vaccine Injury Court, there was a lot of litigation about vaccines. And from what I understand, the government wanted to make sure that vaccines didn't go away and that manufacturers were going to be absolved of liability so they would continue to produce them. So was it the Department of Health and Human Services that actually came up with this table, or was it based upon some of the litigation that had preceded that?
Yeah, I would say that the table was the creation of certainly the Secretary of HHS, certainly the pharmaceuticals, certainly the medical community, and even representatives of vaccine-injured people. So it was a combination of people that came up with the injuries that were most commonly claimed to be caused by vaccines. Mm-hmm. But in the end, the table was a political solution, mm-hmm. and certainly the Secretary of HHS would not concede that the injuries on there are actually caused by vaccines.
Now, getting back to your case, the Dillo case.
Yes.
That girl was injured. She received absolutely no compensation.
No compensation.
And this is where I'm saying the vaccine manufacturers actually caused the injury. There's no payment for this girl, and basically the taxpayers are going to be picking up the tab because she'll probably need to get Social Security or disability for the rest of her life. And again, the burden falls upon the average person, and I think a lot of people don't understand that. You know, people sometimes they think lawyers are only out there, you know, to win a case and to get rich, but in this particular type of industry, it's to actually make people whole. And from what it sounds like, that's not happening all that much these days. No,
again, it's very unpopular to claim that a vaccine caused an injury. Michelle Cedillo, this autistic child, is physically devastated. I mean, she will need medical care. She's had medical care since the age of 15 months, total 24/7 care. She's still living at home with her mother, believe it or not, and she'll need it the rest of her life. And she has very, very dedicated parents who will see that she gets all the care that she needs to the extent that they can. But certainly the taxpayer will have a huge involvement in taking care of her future medical needs. Mm-hmm.
And of course, parents don't live forever either, so there's another problem.
And that's probably her parents' biggest fear.
And it's a shame that could happen. Now, I just want to mention briefly that there's been some litigation in Italy, and the Italian courts have actually ruled that vaccines do cause autism. It happened there. I don't think it's going to happen anytime here soon in this country. I hope it would. But the Italian courts did find, in particular, in two cases. One was in a Rimini case, and one was in another case where a 15-month-old boy received an MMR vaccine back in 2004. He immediately developed bowel and eating problems and received an autistic diagnosis with cognitive delay within a year. The court found that he had been damaged by irreversible complications due to vaccination of the trivalent MMR. Now, if the Italians can get it right, why can't the Americans?
Yeah, that's a great question. As a matter of fact, the standard in Italy, is the same as it is here. It's a legal standard. Is the vaccine more likely than not? The cause of the autism. Again, we don't know mechanisms. We don't have scientific certainty. But this is a legal dispute. Is it more likely than not? Mm-hmm. And again, all the decisions in this country were very, very aggressively stating the fact that there's absolutely no link between vaccines and autism. That theory has been debunked, as many newspapers said. And now in Italy, another court finds, that MMR vaccine does cause autism. And that appears nowhere in the American press. I don't know why. That's it's just something which is anathema, something that again, people can't handle the truth. They can't be told the truth, and so they have to be led, and they are led. They're led by the pharmaceuticals and the government and the medical establishment to believe that vaccines are safe. Again, to keep up immunization rates, and that's the biggest fear.
Okay, could you just hold that thought for a minute? I just want to say about that Italian case, there was a 1,271-page confidential GlaxoSmithKline report that came forth. In this country, discovery, if I understand correctly, we can't get those confidential reports, but the Italian court did. And the judge used that as the basis for his ruling, because in that clinical study, 5 children developed autism in their clinical study, and it was in their confidential notes. So that was the smoking gun. In this country, we can't get those, and I think that is totally wrong. If you can't present evidence, of what due diligence in discovery, how can you find out what the other party knew and when they knew it? So in Italy, they were able to get this discovery, and we can't get it here in this country.
Yeah, one of the aspects of the Vaccine Act is that you're not allowed to sue pharmaceuticals until you first go through like the vaccine program. The result of that has been, since 1988, there have been virtually no lawsuits against pharmaceuticals, so you can't get discovery. Indeed, we did try and get documents from the pharmaceuticals during the omnibus hearing during the Dillo case. However, we were unsuccessful. The pharmaceuticals and the government together were unable to produce the documents that we requested that we thought would help prove our case. So it was impossible for us to get it in the autism proceeding, although they actually did give us many documents that were useless. They gave us
And redacted, I'm sure.
no, well, they gave us 20,000 documents, I believe, many tens of thousands of documents, not one of which we were able to use, not one single document. So, it's a real problem getting discovery in the vaccine program. And again, I think that's a safety issue. When the vaccine program first began, the theory was that a toxic vaccine was being unnecessarily used. And indeed, once the program was enacted and you could not sue pharmaceuticals, then they began using the safer vaccine because they didn't have the fear of lawsuits. I think the fear of lawsuits was a very healthy thing. We don't have that anymore, and it affects safety in I think, a very substantial way.
Right. And just to recap, in Italy, they were able to get that discovery that the 5 children given the MMR got autism,
Right.
and that made the judge, that was the smoking judge for the judge in that
Right.
decision.
And the interesting thing about that, to me anyway, is that, again, we don't know the mechanisms as to how this happens, and we don't have the manufacturer's documents, but here, in this manufacturer's document, the pharmaceuticals had concluded that there was a relationship between the vaccine and autism. It was their conclusion. So that, to me, is very, very important information.
Now, Dr. Seneff, you've done a lot of research in this area on the polysorbic 80s and the adjuvants. Do you want to say something about that?
I would absolutely like to say something, particularly about Gardasil, because Gardasil really worries me. And it's a vaccine, of course, it's administered to teenagers. It's supposed to protect them from a cancer that they probably won't get anyway 40, 50 years later. There's no guarantee that it works, and we won't know whether it works or not until 40, 50 years from now. So it's very convenient that they can just claim that it works without proving it. And it is extremely toxic. I have compared Gardasil to other vaccines for age-matched distribution, and it's scary, the different things that are very statistically significantly more represented in the Gardasil vaccines, things like seizures and coma and death and spontaneous abortion. I think it's caused some young women to go into menopause at a very young age.
And ovarian failure, I've heard.
Yes, it's I think it's going to affect fertility, for example. And we're doing a massive campaign to promote this vaccine. It has a very high level of aluminum in it, and a particularly nasty form of aluminum. And what really infuriates me is that they're allowed to put aluminum in the so-called placebo when they do the studies. So aluminum is probably one of the most critical things in that vaccine that's causing injury. And their placebo is not a placebo. They put aluminum in it. And I am astonished that they're allowed to do that. I do not understand.
That's like cheating.
It's cheating. So they see, well, both the placebo and the vaccine cause these things that are not normal. But because the placebo also causes it, then it's fine. It's really a very strange way to do business. And now they've got a new Gardasil 9. So the other problem is that Gardasil only vaccinates against some strains. The HPV virus, there's many different strains. So they pick the dominant strains. They figure, let's just cover those. We'll wipe them out. That's fine. Now the other strains have a field day. They're able to grow. So they're discovering, oh my gosh, sometimes people get the cancer from one of those other strains shortly after the vaccine. So the vaccine, in some sense, is causing a cancer in a young person who should not be getting cervical cancer at that age. And so now they're putting 9 in, double the aluminum, and push it through. So twice this toxic aluminum in this new vaccine, Gardasil 9, with 9 different strains. There's probably still other strains out there that will simply take over now that these 9 are out of the way, or even different viruses.
This is exactly what's happened with the Hib and the pneumo vaccines, that we've simply selected for the strains that are not in the vaccine, so those strains have multiplied.
Become more virulent.
Yeah, and taken over. Yeah, well, it's going to take a few years before they become more virulent, but I have no doubt
And
that
that's
will
probably
happen.
what's going on with the flu, too, because this year they say, oh, the vaccine's poorly matched. Well, maybe it's poorly matched because it's driven out all the ones that it matches and allowed these others an opportunity to grow. So I think the flu vaccine is kind of a farce. And in fact, there was a study done in Hong Kong where a placebo-controlled study, half the people got the flu vaccine, half the people didn't. They monitored them over the year. And it was interesting because the ones who got the vaccine didn't have a statistically significant decrease in the incidence of flu, but they did have a 4-fold increase in the incidence of syncytial virus. It's not a flu virus, but it gives you symptoms just like the flu. So you protect from one thing, another thing will take over. It's a farcical system. I mean, to say the entire vaccine system can be questioned, I think, as to its validity, even irrespective of whether it's damaging the kids.
And it crosses, from what I understand, it crosses the blood-brain barrier, some of these adjuvants.
Yes, well, what I'm studying MMR, and I'm very interested in what I'm seeing. MMR, of course, is the one that Andrew Wakefield wrote about in 1998, got the paper retracted, the Lancet paper. He's been completely, his license was removed. I mean, he's had a very difficult time because he just suggested that measles should be separated from mumps and rubella, which was a very good idea to keep those separate, because he felt together they were toxic. The measles vaccine puzzled me. I confirmed with the VAERS database that measles, the MMR is associated with autism in the VAERS database. And that association is stronger in the more recent data than it is in the early data. I was puzzled because it doesn't contain aluminum. It doesn't contain mercury. And so I didn't understand what it was about that vaccine that made it so toxic. And I finally realized it was probably glutamate. And so that's what I've been studying lately. Glutamate is a neurotoxin, and it's in only a few of the vaccines, but it includes the MMR and the varicella and the flu vaccine, those three. And so glutamate is normally metabolized in the body to glutamine, which is safe, but we are also exposed to other toxic chemicals, and in particular Roundup, which I've studied very extensively. And glyphosate in Roundup messes up the ability to detox glutamate.
Wow.
So that's a synergistic toxicity that's going to cause a catastrophe.
Well, you know what? We're going to come back to that. We're going to do a part 2 of this. But we're out of time for today. I want to thank our guests, Kevin Conway, Stephanie Seneff, Dr. Moskowitz, for taking their time and educating us all. I also want to thank our viewers for tuning in. For more information on today's topic and our guests, please go to the Legal Edition online at thelegaledition.com. And as always, this information is for general educational purposes only, is not to be construed or relied upon as legal, business, or medical advice. And please consult a professional advisor as to your particular legal, business, or medical needs. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time for more of vaccine safety, efficacy, and injury on part 2 of the Legal Edition.